I've always been a bit of a history buff, and so this wreck I was really looking forward to. It's called the Sherman. She's a Civil War era blockade runner that sank in 1872. It's about 196 feet long, and she started life as the Princess Anne, but after she was captured, eventually was renamed to the Sherman and pressed into service again as a blockade runner. In the winter of 1872, she was actually being towed for repairs and foundered and went down in about 55 feet of water. And she sits about 6 miles off the beach of North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So a little closer in than a lot of the other wrecks in the area. And so because of it being in closer proximity to land, you never know quite what to expect in terms of visibility. We were very fortunate this day, though. We had fantastic conditions. My daughter Abby is along with me on this particular dive. This is one of her first open water dives in salt conditions, and she's usually the leader of the pack on these trips. I'm usually the one lagging behind, kind of looking around at things. Usually things like this, just tons of fish in this area. This is a fantastic example of how an artificial reef can be formed, and the benefit that it has, to marine life in the area. There's so much packed in right around this particular wreck. As you can see, there are a lot of soft corals, sponges, just beautiful marine growth on this because it's been here for so long. And the fish life is just amazing. If you look around at what's strewn about on the bottom, you can see most of the hull of the vessel isn't really intact anymore. Since it's only in 55 feet of water, winter storms, that type of thing, have broken it up over the years. But the iron plates and the actual keel are still intact. They're just laying on the bottom at this point. But lots of fish all over the place. One of the points of attraction for this wreck is that you can still find things like belt buckles and buttons, actual Civil War artifacts. But we didn't really have too much of that turn up on this trip out. I think there was one fellow within our group that went on this dive that actually found a uniform button, but that was about all. I have to admit, though, I wasn't really looking. I was having such a good time looking at all the fish on this wreck that I completely forgot about doing any artifact collecting. If you look closely, you can see that that's the actual prop shaft on the vessel, and that's the flywheel from the rear of the engine housing. Things like this, where they're very heavily constructed, are still intact on this vessel. And eventually in the video, we'll make our way back to the very stern, where there's the propeller and the rudder assembly. But the plating itself, as I said earlier, it's all pretty much fallen over, and it's just sort of laying on the sand at this point. I was kind of hoping, given this cloud of bait fish that's around us, that we would see some of the larger fish following them, trying to make a meal out of them, but there really wasn't much that turned up. Unfortunately, we did find a little bit of detritus on the bottom, which we decided to clean up and get it out of there. It's too beautiful out here to leave that kind of thing just laying around. Pretty sure that was somebody's old fishing weight. There's a tremendous amount of algae growth on this wreck. The nice thing about that is it's a sure sign that you've got good water quality. Also, these urchins that are on the bottom, again, they're very sensitive to variances in water quality. You're not going to find them in an area where there isn't good oxygen dissolved within the water, and the water isn't reasonably clean. So, I always like seeing that whenever we go on these trips. Looks like we've got a little drum there of some variety that took up residence. This is one of the prop shaft supports that you see right there. And as you can see, the shaft itself makes a great place to tie off for the anchor rod for the dive boat above. It's a nice solid mount point. We're making our way back forward on this again. In a little bit, we're going to get toward the front part of the main boiler assembly. We're just starting to see that coming up over on the right. If you look closely, you can actually see the steel ribs that were part of the original infrastructure on the vessel. And then this is the very front of the boiler assembly right here. Another beautiful urchin. A little darker color on that one, but very pretty nonetheless. We're pretty close to the bow of the vessel at this point. The section that we just made our way through would have been the main hold where the cargo would have been stored. And as you can see, once we reach the bow, there's a little bit more detritus out here, but after that, it's just sand. There's really not a whole lot beyond that, and so the marine life, is going to kind of taper off in terms of the density of it out here. Did find a sheep's head, though. I'm used to catching these guys right along the pilings in closer to shore, but it's kind of neat to see one of these underwater, sort of on his home turf. Start making our way back aft again. We have a couple of sea bass here. It's always nice to see one of my favorite entrees, up close and personal. One thing I always forget to bring with me on these trips, and I see other people do it sometimes, is to bring a little bit of bait down with me to kind of strewn about and attract the fish in. Somehow I always seem to forget that. Feels a little like cheating, though, doing that just to get them closer to you. It's more fun to just sort of, swim along and pursue them. Now as we're making our way aft here, we're going to be coming up again on the boiler assembly that I mentioned earlier. The neat thing about that on this vessel is that if you know anything about boilers, they have tubes that run all through them. That's where the water would pass through to become heated up from the combustible material around them and then create steam. Well, those tubes have since become home to a lot of marine life. If you look carefully to the right here in the frame, you can see the openings for the boiler tubes themselves. And as you can see, there's a lot of growth all around those. Over the years, though, parts of them have broken up considerably. As we're making our way toward the aft section of the boiler, you can see there's a lot of damage to them, but not unexpected in water this shallow. Storms tend to definitely take a toll on this type of thing. Amazing cloud of these fish schooling along here. Always amazes me how they move in such perfect synchronization. Even a few angelfish here. We're going to start making our way toward the surface here relatively soon. This is one of the last dives of the day, and so we're trying to be fairly conscious of the residual nitrogen buildup. We did the calculations earlier before the actual dive, just to make sure that everything looked okay on paper, and it's fine. You know, we're not in water that deep, but for purposes of learning, you know, since Abby's a relatively new diver, as well as just general good practice, we're trying to stick pretty close to the numbers.